Dr. Clark, Dr. Caruth, thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
It's a pleasure. Dr. Clark, you've been traveling, so I hope you're back acclimated and time zoned and all that stuff.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's still a little bit of jet lag, but I'm good.
I can imagine. I wanted to talk. Obviously, let's start sort of at what's about to happen, and if then we can backtrack and figure out how we got here, and some things that are also about to happen. So I want to talk about the conference first and foremost. The hip hop conference is happening at Howard. This is now the second year, although you've had a history of conferences at Howard that have been hip hop oriented. Just let us know what's in store for this year's iteration of that fantastic conference that I was at last year. Blessed and honored to have been part of. Tell me what's happening this year. What's in the works?
So while we've gotten a lot of submissions this year, a lot more than we did last year. So we're excited about the panels that we're going to have people from just diverse backgrounds. We have, of course, a lot of people from Howard, a lot of faculty, students, but we also have a lot of community people. We're showing a documentary that was made by Chuck D when he was at UCLA doing a residency. So the folks at UCLA are coming with the film to do a Q&A. We're going to have several workshops and also performances and conversations with artists as well. So yeah, we've got a lot of exciting things planned.
Yeah. What was the, I guess, having not had done a conference of that size, in some time last year, what was the takeaway from, launching it again or, bringing it to fruition? What was the takeaways? What did you want to do different or would you want to do the same? Or would what came out of it that you really enjoyed?
Well, it was definitely from what was done, like the first one, which was in 1991, which was student driven. And we were lucky to have Timothy Jones, now at Howard as a faculty member. So he joined the committee. But I think we were also lucky to have folks from different backgrounds. So my department is African Studies. Dr. Caruth is in communication. We have people from fine arts, people from business. So we were able to really kind of tap into each other's strengths and backgrounds to really kind of bring together. We had a really good balance of community folks, people in academia, artists. We had a really good gender balance. And so we were really happy about this. This year, it seems like we're going to have a lot more people doing international stuff, working on talking about hip hop in Latin America, Asia, Africa. So yeah, so it's definitely been, this one is definitely more driven by faculty than students, but we have definitely kind of made an effort to make sure we bring in students, and so that it's not just a bunch of old folks kind of talking to students about hip hop, that they are also taking ownership of the conference as well.
Yeah, that's always key. Is there a theme for this year?
Yeah, Dr. Caruth?
Do we have a theme? Do we come up with a theme? Could you remind me? I think it was just building off of last year's success. Hip hop 50, and then looking at hip hop beyond the 50th. And to your point and Dr. Clark's point, hip hop is so dynamic, it's so robust, and I think bringing it back last year during the 50th was kind of a testament to that. And the amount of people that came out, the diverse backgrounds, as Dr. Clark mentioned. But now, going into this year, particularly with the launch of the minor officially that will be kicking off. So that's a good milestone for us to kind of jumpstart the idea. And then a variety of people looking to participate. I think the number of submissions that we got is a testament to that. And then also the different disciplines that we'll be focusing on. And so as Dr. Clark mentioned, we have industry folks, student participation, and just the idea that hip hop is just a dynamic field. It's not static. So, we're going to learn a lot because people are doing a variety of research in the area from an international perspective. When we look at what's happening in technology, and even how with the advent of technology, you're going to see new fields of industry emerge from it. When you're looking at ideas of AI, and how do you manage that? How do you regulate that? This industry as a whole, are they going to embrace that and find a way to incorporate it into the field as it continues to grow? So just being around scholars that are doing research in those specific areas would be interesting to see, because sometimes we all siloed and we're doing great work, and we hear about people in LA and people in New York doing this, and that. But when we get together in one place, we can be collectively exchanging ideas. And I think that's probably part of what we do as academics. You know, we kind of bring people together to create a brain trust of sharing ideas and actually finding ways to collaborate and work together. So I think that's the goal of this conference. So being able to be a part of it and actually having this as being the second year for this particular conference, because it's a hip hop studies conference, not just about the art of hip hop, but the different aspects of it. I think that's the beauty.
Yeah, and I always appreciate, obviously, when we spend, I won't say it like this, but less time on the entertainment side of things, more about the interdisciplinary, you know, ways that hip hop does touch upon, like you said, all these industries, all these fields that aren't always typically associated with the art forms themselves. So that's always valuable to me, you know, when you have that opportunity. And so when you bring in folks that aren't necessarily, all right, we don't discount the artist and the artistry, you know, but the other areas and aspects, that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's key. I mean, from fashion to people that are doing the dance aspects of it. Obviously, the musicology is a core and key part of it, but the philosophy of hip hop, we have some interest from folks out of my school of communications that are in the legal field of criminology of hip hop, with some of the things that we've seen emerge recently for a variety of reasons, but just the idea of how far can the art form be taken, and what aspects of it are literal, figurative, and which aspects of it are literal, and which parts of it can be kind of, I use the word used, but which parts of it can be incorporated into things that play out in real life. And should we be on guard? You know, what is art and things that happen in the real world? Is there a balance there, right? What are some things that are theoretical and some things that are practical, right? And should artists be on guard about expressing themselves through this art form as a way of maybe having this thing come back and bite them, just based on what's happening now?
Yeah, as I did the thing that New Yorkers do, and I moved to Atlanta, and so I'm right here with the Thug trial, and of course, you know, you hear a lot of these things happening in legal circles throughout the country, well, throughout the world, really. Dr. Ruth, actually, that ties into something about like sort of some of your work that as I understand it, studying technology, media, communications, right? And particularly some of the instances of disinformation or misinformation that's happening through these channels, particularly as they affect communities of color, and I guess the growth of this vehicle to reach and to disseminate information at scale. How does that work, studying that work, tie into, I guess, the entertainment business or entertainment or social media as a whole, but maybe hip hop in general? How do these things connect, and how bad is it?
I mean, I think we're at a crossroads, right? Because the technology has allowed for the decentralization of the art form, where you don't have as many gatekeepers, right, to determine what makes it, what doesn't, right? And you know, folks can be in their basements and their rooms and their offices or wherever, and and make music without it having to be regulated by a certain group of people. But at the same time, you ask yourself, within that scope, where's the quality control, right? And art is so subjective, music is so subjective. How do we then determine which aspects of it is palatable, right? And which aspects of it should be given the ability for it to find its audience? And I think it's a balance. In looking at AI, for example, I believe there's some ways where AI now is being validated, right? So how can we judge that, where artists put their works out and with permission maybe allow derivatives to be created from it, and those derivatives allow the art form to spread a lot quicker? So when you look at technology, and I point to a recent episode with Kendrick Lamar, with the whole situation with Drake, when he allowed people have access to the work without putting any restrictions on it. And that allowed it to kind of flourish. It was almost like a form of guerrilla marketing, if you will, right? Because then it took on a life of its own, and it spread quicker than he could have just trying to put it into regular, pockets of how do you kind of distribute and put your music out? Do you tie it to a brand? Do you put it in a commercial? Rather than he gave it to the people and said, you have at it, right? Because everybody know where it came from. And ultimately it would come back to him anyway, but it's almost like a freebie. So technology is erupting and evolving. But again, it comes back to, as Dr. Clark alluded to earlier, are we, should we be mindful of us not being a bunch of old people in the room talking about that's not music, what is that, or should we just allow it to flourish and grow? Because these, the younger generation, the technologies, their soundtrack, their access to the mediums and platforms that ultimately, usually have been controlled by other folks, right? So how do you balance that? I don't even have an answer for it, right? There are some artists that are putting out great work.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. Just the whole thing's sort of a blessing and a curse, I suppose.
Right.
In many ways. Yeah. Dr. Clark, what are your thoughts about that? And also, like, I know, we've talked, and I know that the underlying theme of a lot of the work that you do, and we'll talk about your work abroad. I know it's Hip Hop Could Save America, and I know it could save the world too. Everyone tells me, I know. I'm working on that. Can I do this one first? I tell them, let me do this show first, then we'll do that show. I own the domain. I'm on it. But specifically to the idea of, the idea that hip hop still has that force of social justice, in it, that the ability to spread messaging and to bring people together, maybe not always on the radio, like we used to have Fight the Power on the radio and you could hear it, but those songs exist, those artists still exist, those movements still exist. The conferences, like I said, there's no secret that by doing hip hop studies correctly, you're doing social justice, right? You're uplifting the field. And I think, so how does technology, how do you see like sort of the current state of music, the art, communications, technology, digital media, and this wild media ecosystem like playing off of each other today?
Well, I definitely think one of the things I love about being in academia is the students, this generation, the younger generation, Gen Z, is not afraid to challenge. And so whatever our concepts or ideas are, they constantly challenge us if they don't agree. And so I know I have been forced to kind of check myself and with like drill music, for example, I've had to really ask them like, what's going on? What am I missing? I don't really feel like sitting and listening to hours of drill music to figure it out. So really getting feedback from them, but then also kind of understanding how they're using technology and not having that kind of knee-jerk reaction to this is not authentic. But looking at how they're finding their voices, how they're using technology in ways that, older generations, I'm Gen X, we just have been, a lot of us have been slower to embrace. And when we see something we don't know, or we don't understand, or we can't do, I think the temptation is to just reject it. And so being in academia and working with students, it's forcing us to contend with it. And as faculty, we have to contend with AI. It's such a huge part of what's happening. And so we can't just dismiss. So I have enjoyed learning a lot from students and really learning a lot about the technology through their eyes. So that's been nice.
Yeah. And again, relating that to how you see things happen in other parts of the world, one of the other great perspectives that you bring, that a lot of us, I don't know if you heard this, but America could be very self-centered. And we do that in hip hop. We do that all the time. We don't really think about, the global aspects of it. So I have your book, and I love, hearing the podcast because you bring to light some of the perspectives that, because we're so entertainment business minded with the culture these days here in America, we think these things don't exist, but they exist perhaps elsewhere. It's more of the zeitgeist in some of the other countries and some of parts of the world. So what are some comparisons that you see when you're traveling abroad, covering hip hop in Africa, for example? And I know that we could talk about that for a year. Again, people don't, Africa is not just a country, right? From what I understand. Yeah. But just in general, sort of the idea that we used to have this, it used to be much more part of what we would see in terms of hip hop, social justice messaging, being, pushing back, counterculture, all that stuff. And we don't see it as much here. Again, I just have to always remind people that it does exist, and it exists in different forms these days. What do you see parallel in how that aspect of hip hop lives and breathes outside of the borders of the United States?
Well, I do think everyone around the world is plugged into what's happening here. So like people on the continent are debating Kendrick Drake, and so they were engaged in those conversations. And I know in the UK, for example, most of the artists are children of African and Caribbean immigrants, but they're also dealing with the whole using of hip hop lyrics to to basically prosecute artists. So that's happening in the UK as well. You know, when Chuck D recently said that the future of hip hop was in Africa, I was like, oh, like, and I felt good because it's Chuck D. So like, who's gonna argue with Chuck D? But I mean, just really the way artists are using language and mixing languages, 3 and 4 languages in one verse. But I also think there's a bigger connection is happening between different countries in Africa and Europe. So artists are finding great careers in Europe, England and France. There are a lot of opportunities. I once saw, it was a documentary or a show or something where I think it was Ice Cube who was talking to Stormzy, who's a like massively famous artist. But he was talking to Stormzy as if, oh, isn't this nice? Oh, you do hip hop in the UK? Oh, that's
cute.
Yeah.
Like, very demure.
Yeah.
Huge. So I think we don't even really have a concept of what's happening right there in Europe. I know that a lot of artists are, you know, when I was there, Talib Kweli was there, and I was talking to some of the artists in the UK, and they were saying that a lot of Gen X artists will come to the UK because they know that their music is very much appreciated. And so Talib did like 3 shows, and the shows I went to, they were, you know, smaller venues, but they were all packed. So they were saying that a lot of artists will come like every year to do shows because that's where they're kind of getting the love, where in the States, they may not get that same kind of reception. So there's a lot happening in Europe. There's a lot happening in Asia. There's, of course, a lot happening in Africa. So I definitely would love for us to kind of, in the States, to really embrace what's happening internationally. I know the Trinity International Hip Hop Festival that happens every year in Connecticut is like the best place for me to go and see who from all over the world is doing what.
Yeah.
But I wish we had more festivals that were international, more places where international folks kind of came together and could see what's happening in each other's hip hop communities.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just also plug the conference that I helped co-chair with Dr. Tasha Iglesias, the Global Conference on Hip Hop Education, which isn't at festival like status yet, but that'd be great to get there. You know what I mean? But, you know, we grew out of the pandemic. We did stuff remotely, and we just did an in-person last year in California at UC, University of California, one of the places.
I remember. I didn't get a chance to come, but I remember. Yeah.
So we're looking into doing that again. But again, to your point, the more of the international aspect, the merrier. You know, maybe we'll have a Hip Hop Could Save the World soon. We're working on it. So let's talk about then bringing it back home, bringing it back to Howard. Let's talk about this minor program. We talked about it last year when it was sort of in its, you know, planning stages, or you were pushing for it. I want to know what goes into that. Also, it's a little bit surprising that these don't exist more, you know, already, and that seems like it was a long time coming. So I'd like to just know a little bit about the genesis of the idea, how it came to be, and you know, what does it look like in practice?
Well, we started in 2019 before COVID, and a bunch of us kind of came together and, you know, started talking about wanting to have a minor. We weren't sure if we wanted to do a major or a minor, so we felt like a minor was easier. And Howard, I don't know how many years ago the Interdisciplinary Studies Department was established, but it hasn't always been there. But it is a place to house minors and majors that include classes from multiple departments. Because prior to, the biggest kind of setback was which department was going to house it. Okay. And of course, like anything hip hop related, there's always kind of the battle over, you know, who's going to have control over it.
Very hip hop thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So IDS really allowed us to say, okay, we want to have the minor. We want to be able to have classes from departments all over the university. And then COVID happened, but some of us, like, we stuck with it. We were meeting during the summer. We were meeting during breaks. It was, we were going to stick with it. And I think it took, a handful of us to really kind of stick with it. Folks came and went. And so we finally kind of went through all the hurdles, getting the signatures and, question after question after question. Hit the board of trustees. From what I understand, again, the hip hop generation, we're at an age now where we can make things happen.
Yeah.
So there were people on the board who came from it, so they were able to kind of like advocate for us.
Right. It wasn't a foreign idea. as it might have been if it had been done 10 years earlier. You got people in there who are like, what is what? Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the beauty of it too, what Dr. Clark mentioned, folks are operating in their silos. They had individual one-off classes.
Yeah.
Everybody feels so personal about their connection to hip hop and usually sees it and possibly teaches it from that lens. And that could kind of be restrictive because I think the knowledge that they have would probably benefit a broader group of students and faculty members as well. So having a group worked with Dr. Clark and the other members, Ms. King and others, to say, hey, the long-term goal would be to have a major, but let's start off with a minor since we have these classes that are being offered anyway. Students need to have a minor, and we can touch on aspects of hip hop that can give everyone kind of a sampling of what could be. So coming out of School of Communications, we have audio engineering and production classes taught by Grammy nominated artists and engineers, right? We have philosophy of hip hop. We have the business of hip hop and music, and we have fashion. So being able to put that under one space, and as Dr. Clark mentioned, not having someone feel territorial about their stuff and it can be opened up to everybody else, kind of gives folks an example. And then tying that to the conference where you have practitioners and scholars from all over saying, hey, Howard had something here, and maybe let's go over here and kind of share our insight, will give us a platform to then continue to elevate it. And as classes are being added and we kind of get past that aspect of it, then we can look down maybe 2-3 years down the line. Can we really get a major going, particularly when you have PWIs far ahead of where we are? They're collecting artifacts. They're having artists in residence. I mean, you can go down the list. And I think we have the ability to do that once we have this established, because we can go out and seek the support to bring artists in, because oftentimes that's always a drawback. Some other schools are more resourced than we are. But being able to say we have a space to house this program, and now we can bring in subject matter experts, particularly as we're seeing the evolution of the technology as we talked about, and the field is evolving rapidly. Being able to have those folks come in and let students know in particular, like, hey, this is where the industry is going. This is where you may want to try to channel yourself, to position yourself to be key members of the industry going forward. There were some job opportunities. Here's how the industry is shifting. Here's how you can prepare yourself to be a part of this new marketplace, given what's happening. Because at the end of the day, I don't think the intellectuals and IP owners and artists are going anywhere. It's just a matter of what vehicles now are going to be available to allow them to put their work into the marketplace. Yeah. And if we can prepare our students to kind of be up on those trends, and as I think Dr. Clark mentioned, it's a two-way street, because students they're creators, but they're also telling us what's happening and where we need to be, where we need to be looking in terms of the industry. And I know in working in the ad space, for example, the ad agencies come to us looking for our students to find out what they're thinking. But one thing that came out of several conversations, particularly during COVID, was that culture tells them what to do, right? So the culture drives the marketplace. So whatever's happening culture-wise, they tend to then move in that direction and shift their ideas, talk to their brand partners, sponsors, corporate folks to say, hey, this is what's happening on the ground. If you look at what happened yesterday with the WNBA, I was looking at a stat today where they sold out in one day of all their merch on the Fanatics store, right?
Wow.
And they, so, the TV ratings were up. The arena was sold out last night. And that game 5 was like a men's game 7.
Sure was. I watched it, and I don't watch a lot of them, but I watched that one. I got into the hype too. I already know. Yeah.
So it's working. Things like that. And then when you look at the number of eyeballs and the things, and if you look at it from a consumer driven standpoint, if you look at the commercials and the things that were happening, the underlying tone was pop culture, which I call hip hop, right? And that drives it. So where are we going now? Are we going to see things that are catered more to a female woman demographic from the standpoint of artists, right? Are we going to see more artists from that perspective drive the narrative in terms of their music, what they're saying, how they're presenting themselves to drive the hip hop culture forward? And part of the conversation is going back to like what's happening where do we balance entertainment versus social commentary, right? Can we find that medium that makes everybody happy where it can still move industry, talk about what's happening in various communities and how people are feeling about themselves, how they want to be seen, but also still create commerce, right? And I think the genre and the medium is growing in a lot of different ways. And, being able to have that kind of space for that commentary, that exchange of ideas at Howard in particular through the conference and through the minors, kind of our goal at this point.
Yeah, sounds well. It's noble, and also it's in the DNA of Howard. Like I mean, going back to those, that original conference and the student leadership that came out of those days. It's a great place for it. I think. Just a couple more. You're talking about things of the moment. Just real quick, your thoughts on how hip hop can or should or needs to or will touch on the civic engagement of young people. You deal with young folk all the time. They're just getting, involved politically. How do those worlds, come together? Hip hop and politics, or hip hop and political, I won't say activism necessarily, but just civic engagement. How do you see those fields connecting under, in the halls of Howard?
Well, Howard is, has a history of producing social activists. And I think hip hop is a genre that is also kind of spoken truth to power, regardless of, where you are in the world. I think that looking at the challenges, the topics that young people are dealing with now, I do think that the level of political content in mainstream hip hop we know has declined. And so in talking to students about what artists are you listening to for that social political content, they don't have as many options.
Yeah.
But I do see that some things are there, but they look different. So looking at specifically hip hop feminism and the way women are really expressing their sexuality in ways I think some older generations and some folks are kind of not as comfortable with. I know I haven't been quite as comfortable with some of it.
Sure.
But in talking to women about them kind of taking charge of their own sexuality and kind of really dismantling respectability politics in ways that are sometimes uncomfortable, but it is forcing us to kind of have conversations. So I think that's one area. I definitely think gender is one area where we need to have more conversations, because I do think that some of the women that are artists that are kind of centering their sexuality in explicit ways are doing so because the industry says this is a kind of artist we want to present.
Right.
And if you're not going to fit this mold, then we're not, going to kind of invest in you.
Sure.
So understanding the difference between supporting women and being able to center their sexuality in ways that they want, and kind of understanding and supporting women who are being pressured, but then also supporting those who want to center their sexualities in more explicit ways. I think kind of those are the conversations I see a lot of them grappling with in ways that are slightly different than my generation grappled with it.
Yeah. I was going to say, that does touch upon, in some ways, political issues of the day,
Right.
You were going to say, Dr. Booth?
Yeah, I would say, well, one, a lot of my students, my class, I could count on one hand how many male students I have, right? So my classes are predominantly young ladies, young women. And, but for a lot of them, for this go around, this is their first time voting, right? And being involved in the electoral process. So having someone like Kamala in this forefront now could be that tipping point. I know to a certain degree, some students kind of are exhausted about the current nature of hip hop, right? Not necessarily it has to be fully social commentary and political commentary all the time, but I think there's some things that they're kind of tired of to a certain degree. The other part of it, particularly in my scope and where I teach on the advertising perspectives, it's a balance, and I don't have the answer to it, quite honestly, but you give an artist an opportunity to evolve and grow over a period of time, right? And as Dr. Clark mentioned, there's a framework of here's a roadmap to how you become successful as a woman in the industry. If you look at artists like Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion, they've all evolved from when they came out. Now they're corporate sweetheart. You see Meg everywhere. You see her in commercials and movies, and she's, you know, kind of the it person at the moment, right? If you look at where she was versus where she is now, it's almost like a 360. So the point is that she'd come in and say, I have this captive audience now. I need to evolve and grow as an artist, and my art form has changed, or has she shifted based on the corporate pressures to say, if you want to go further, here's what you need to do. Come back to where we are now. You have an artist kind of, you know, and been a hot topic, but Sexy Red, right? So she's here at this moment, and some students like what she does, how she presents herself. They like the fact that her music is hot, and not buying into the political, the lyricism of it, but just kind of like it's a hot song. But some students, I've had conversation with them. Do you allow that artist to grow, or would she lose that core fan base because this is how they know her? Couple that with, because she's such a big attention grabber, would corporate America, as Dr. Clark mentioned, respectability politics, do you lower that bar standard to say she's going to give us a bunch of eyeballs, so we don't care what she's saying, right? So it's like, how do you have that? I don't even feel comfortable having that conversation because I'm not a woman, right? How do I know what and how they should be presenting themselves? Is it an art form? Is it her artistry? Is it the opportunity that she had to get in the door based on the fact that they are gatekeepers that probably wouldn't allow her in any other way? Maybe she has more to say and she needs to grow to that point. Do we have that tolerance, right? And the challenge that I always struggle with is sometimes the loudest voice is not always the representation of who we are.
Sure.
And in conversations with my students, sometimes we're the only person of color in the room, and sometimes you're the only woman in the room, right? And you're asked to be the arbiter of what we like, right? And when there's an assumption that we like all the things that are the most played, the most seen, the most visible, when you may have, you know, like I always tell my students, my daughter likes Steve Lacy and folks like that, Tyler the Creator, and folks that are different to a certain degree in terms of their presentation of their art, but they're not messaging out the things that you hear every day, right? So where's that balance? And I don't necessarily think we have an answer, but going back to the conference and being in front of young people, it's all the idea of, it's all the notion of exchanging ideas, right? So we can find out, have an open dialogue about it, because I don't think it's going to ever be solved with one or two conversations. It's going to have to be ongoing dialogue, because everything is happening simultaneously, right? The technology doesn't slow down while the conversation is happening, while the artists are being developed, right? I think the music industry is shifting. It kind of almost reminds me of when, you went away from physical CDs and Apple started charging 99 cents for a download.
Right.
Everybody was talking about, oh, sure, what do we do now? You know, you don't have to buy a whole CD. It's going to disrupt and destroy things as we know it. And however, we evolved and we adapted to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I always say, you know, hip hop, especially hip hop minded folks, folks with hip hop sensibilities are perhaps the best at adapting and pivoting, you know, because it's always the art of the remix. It's always, you know, flipping it to something else. And so that's why these conversations continue to happen and need to happen. They need to happen in a place like Howard, of course. And so let's just remind one time again, the conference is a good, milestone, yearly reminder to get together and have these discussions that are necessary. It's coming up again, and just once again, what can we expect from there, and what are we looking forward to?
Really a community of folks coming together, community of activists, artists, academics coming together. And honestly, I love the networking that happens. I love thinking like, oh, these people need to be in the room, and then seeing them in the room together.
Right.
So that's what I'm excited about, is people getting together with other people who are doing similar work and then building off of that. Because I have seen folks post-conference kind of do stuff together or go to each other's events, do projects together. So that's what I'm looking forward to. It's really just a kind of massive meeting of hip hop artists, activists, hip hop heads, coming together and building.
I always tell the artists don't always think academic conference is where I should be. Right. But I always say artists, that's exactly where you should be, because as you talk, Dr. Caruth, about the evolution of your artistry, one of the ways to do that is to realize that you don't just have to be on stage in front of, a crowd of people. You could be in a room full of teachers, or you could become a teaching artist, or there's other ways to kind of divert your artistry. And it's so inspiring. I've talked to artists that have been at some of these touches. I didn't even know. They feel so comfortable. They see a sense of, I don't know, just like I said, new avenues where their art is respected and looked at critically, which sometimes they want more than they get from just a fan listening and, loving what they're doing.
Yeah. And I will also say, first of all, the conference is November 15th, 16th, and 17th. We'll have an opening reception, a full day of conference and panels and breakout sessions. We'll have a smaller session on Sunday, have a student opportunity for students to have a town hall and just talk about what's on their mind rather than us talking about what they should be talking about, what they're thinking. And that's run by some graduate students who are studying hip hop and, more in tune with what's happening on the ground. So I would definitely say that part of it is a key component of what we need to do to continue to push this dialogue and conversation forward.
Very dope. Well, as y'all know, I will do my best to spread the word, let people know about it. I did already amplify the call for papers earlier. So if you got a lot of submissions, it must be because a lot of people listen to me. Yeah. I'm just going to take that. I'm going to just give myself that credit. But I'm excited to see it, to hear about it, to learn about it, to let people know about it. And as I can attest to, it is quite a place to be. So yeah. So I thank you both for your time breaking all this down, the hip hop minor, the conference, everything that's happening in Howard and in your respective departments. It's an honor to talk to you, and I love learning more about your work. Is there anything else that I need to express to folks that we might have missed or that I didn't cover?
No, I will at Howard Hip Hop on IG. We're on Instagram at Howard Hip Hop. And so you can also find some information there and reach out to us at hiphop@howard.edu is an email address that folks can use. I want to thank you too, because I've been a long time listener of the show and, actually reached out to some people, especially Timothy, when he was on your show. I had to get on him he was talking about us at Howard. And so, I heard you on the podcast.
Yeah.
Look at me affecting the zeitgeist.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing too.
I appreciate that appreciation very much.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll see you soon. Thanks again. And again, come back and tell us anytime.
Yes. Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
All right.
Manny Faces. You sick for this one. Sick for this one. Sick.